It's time for TV Skywriter. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to TV Skywriter. I'm Patricia A. Murray, your host. Ordinarily, I do the Durham Skywriter, this Durham, North Carolina's online community paper. But today, we're doing TV Skywriter. That's where I introduce you to people that I think you should know. So let me get my little dossier here. My guest is Adrienne Washington, PhD. I know that sounds good, right? Absolutely. She is a sociolinguist and the first Black person to earn a PhD in linguistics at the University of Pittsburgh. She got her, I assume, it says that you went to Hampton, so your BA is from Hampton, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, from Hampton University. And her studies have led her to travel to Bahia in Brazil. So we'll talk about that as well. So, Dr. Washington, which I know sounds really delicious. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing really great. I saw you on Facebook. Social media is so cool. You know, very often Black folks share information on Facebook when someone achieves something, and then we all get excited. And I figured I'd reach out to you and actually interview you on TV Skywriter.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely.
It's nice because it connects people in, distant places that you may not have otherwise come across. So.
Exactly. Now, I said the word sociolinguist. I've never said that word before. Can you tell us what that is?
Well, I study basically language and its intersection with society. So basically looking at language and different social issues. Sometimes people look at maybe how language is used by particular genders or in particular geographic regions. So different types of social units. We can examine language by those different types of divisions. I'm more interested in the intersection of language and race. But basically that's what sociolinguists do.
What made you even curious about this? Did you grow up as a kid who was like fascinated by the slang in the neighborhood and wondered what was going on with language, or what?
Well, I was always fascinated with language. My mom always tells the story of how we were being taught Spanish at school, in elementary school, and I would always come home and I would make flashcards and stuff. And I remembered some of the vocabulary. So I would practice with my stuffed animals, teaching them, Spanish. But what is even funnier is I think I was able to pick up some of the, intonation and pronunciation of Spanish where I could make up Spanish words. So they weren't even always Spanish words. I just was fascinated with the idea of speaking another language. So I filled in the gaps where I didn't have real Spanish, and to the point where my mom actually thought I was becoming proficient in the language. But yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated with other languages, and I've also been very fascinated with genealogy and my ancestry, my heritage. My mom is from the Low Country, which is what we call, the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia, and even some parts of Florida. So she grew up
is that Gullah?
Gullah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so she grew up speaking Gullah, and we went to the Heritage Festival. We went to the Gullah Festival and things like that. So, I remember when I was in fourth grade, I think we'd had show and tell still. So when we went to, I don't remember which festival we went to, but the point is we spent some time in South Carolina, went to one of the festivals, and I came back and I brought sugarcane to my classmates. I think we have the book of, the Gospel of John in Gullah. And so I took, I took the book to school, and I was so proud to share it with my classmates. So, and I think we also ate at a Gullah restaurant while we were there. So I've always been fascinated, and they ask you to do it at different grade levels. So I think again in high school, they asked me to do a family history report. And I was just always fascinated with it. And then when I was, working on my undergraduate degree, I majored in Spanish. But English was my minor. And one of the classes being taught at Hampton by Dr. Margaret Lee was African-American English. And one of the topics that we were going to tackle, I remember looking at the syllabus, I think before I even registered, it said Gullah. And I thought, well, I'm registered for this class, just to know more again about this topic that had always fascinated me. And so
I have to butt in because you're saying Gullah. I've heard of it. So have they traced where Gullah comes from? Is it directly from Ghana or Nigeria, or do they know exactly where it comes from?
Well, I think that it probably has influence from a number of languages. I mean, some people suggest that even the name Gullah comes from the word Angola, but I think there's a number of languages that have actually influenced it. I mean, I know it has Bantu influence. It has, it has a number of West African influences. And then aside from that, it's also a product of contact between some of the slaves that had been in what we call the seasoning colonies. So slaves that were in the West Indies originally and then were brought to the Low Country. So it has, direct West African influence.
Interesting.
And then it also has, maybe secondary West African influence from slaves who had spent some time in the Americas and then were brought here.
Okay.
But yeah, I think what's so interesting about the case of Gullah is the degree of linguistic and cultural retention, compared to other Black languages in the Americas. So
how is that possible? Are they more segregated from the rest of typical society in South Carolina?
Yes, especially on the Sea Islands. There were a lot of geographical barriers and things that supported it. So actually, where my mom grew up, she grew up on Ladies Island, but there's also like St. Helena Island and, Sea Island. So some of the Low Country is mainland South Carolina, but some of it is actually only accessible by bridge now. And, at the turn of the 20th century, it was only accessible by ferry. And then, there were, major population disparities. So you had like a large number of Blacks to whites, and, the proportion. So this, allowed for the preservation of the language. And then also, I think because of the population disparity after the Civil War, I think a lot of people decided it was probably a good idea, given the dominance of Blacks population, the predominance of Blacks, a lot of whites decided it was better to leave the area. So I think this also allowed the language to kind of be, to be preserved.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So you started young with your interest in language.
Yes, I did.
So you majored in Spanish in college. So did you come completely bilingual, totally fluent in Spanish?
The funny thing about Spanish is I was always more comfortable writing it and reading it. I don't think I spoke it as much. And so that's the funny thing about like when I learned Portuguese, I decided, not to do it that way, to go right for, oral communication, to get comfortable with that, and, now I'm able to, read, write, and speak it. But, I made sure that I was able to, communicate with people more comfortably, which was, a major asset with my dissertation research. But, yeah.
So may I ask you this before we talk about your studies? When someone studies linguistics, usually what is the goal they have in mind in terms of career choices?
Well, I think it's one of those fields where if you sign up for it, you're, committing yourself to maybe additional degrees if you want to use it. I mean, some people study it and then they go and teach a language. So a lot of times you have people traveling to teach English as a second language. And those people may get a bachelor's, or they may get a master's. But a lot of people who study it actually just plan to research, the way human language works, the way human communication works. So their goal is to, be a researcher, a college professor, or both.
Let me ask you this. Okay. A friend of mine was watching PBS TV and he was not paying attention. He was only half watching. It was a period piece. It was a British show. It was like 16th century medieval or whatever the heck that era is. And one of the guys says, I'm fixing to do this. And he looked up because usually we consider that Black English. Later, I read that a lot of what we call bad or mistakes that we make in English are really remnants of another era because of the segregation of Black folks in the USA. We kept a lot of the old English phrases, but now because we haven't studied it, we are told that it's bad
Mm-hmm.
when it's really just old.
Mm-hmm.
What did you uncover in your studies of Black English? Interesting things like that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things like that. I mean, there are even debates about the origins of what we call Black English or African American English, or some
Mm-hmm.
people call it Bonics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it definitely is the product of contact between speakers of West African languages and speakers or European settlers, speakers of like English dialects.
Mm-hmm.
But so of course there, are elements that are influenced by West African languages. But yeah, there are elements that are also, what we would call archaisms, that have just fallen out of use. And we just think, what, where did you learn to speak like that? Is that, the way people originally understood or misunderstood Black English is that it was a corruption, or people were just failing to learn English, or that maybe there was some cognitive deficiencies even. But yeah, I mean, the patterns in Black English have so many origins. And as you were saying, when people are talking about the origins of the language, some of the things we actually do realize come from older varieties of English, or even if they don't come from older varieties of English, there have been debates that have been sparked by the fact that we see in Black English features in older varieties. So there's something you call metathesis, which is where you flip the order of certain sounds in a word. So maybe you've heard someone say ask a question instead of ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
But the word wasp, for example, was originally pronounced with the P sound before the S sound. So this like wops.
Really? You mean correctly? That was considered the correct
at one point, or even axe has been pronounced differently. Or I think well, so yeah, basically with that idea, this idea that sounds can, flip order, is quite common. So, people are just, disgusted by the idea of axe. And sometimes I even make sure I'm not accidentally saying axe. But yeah, it's something that we can observe in other varieties of English. Even the way we use be, what we might call uninflected be. What I mean by that is you might hear a Black English speaker using just the word be, and they don't conjugate the verb. Like Clarence Carter said, I be stroking. And someone might say, do you mean I am stroking? And it's like, no, I don't mean that right now in the present moment I am. What I mean, what uninflected be means is habitually, regularly, I engage in the action of stroking to the east and to the west, etc. So it's not the same as I am stroking. But that uninflected be has been observed in some settlers' dialects. I'm not saying that definitively it comes from that, but I will say that linguists have engaged in debates where we're like, did that come from settlers' dialects? And that's still a hot topic, where you'll have some people say, it's very possible that it did, since we're observing it in, earlier dialects of English.
I read that be phenomenon is also called the continuing past.
Okay.
So it's like, oh, she always be doing that.
Okay.
Which means she's not doing it now, but she always does that.
Yeah, like it's a regular thing.
Yeah.
Or like an extended action. Yeah, which is why it's, again, to the untrained ear, a lot of times there's this tendency to think that someone is just failing to speak English.
Somebody's stupid or whatever.
Yeah, like, why aren't you saying I am? Or why, but it's
a different tense. It really is a different tense. A continuing past is it just doesn't exist in standard English.
Yeah.
But it's a thing.
Yeah, you would have to add more words to convey that type of meaning. And so, yeah, we can talk about tense, which is like time of an action. But, a lot of times what you see in Black English is different, that we use a different aspect system. And by aspect, we mean like the way an action is carried out. Like, Does it happen over time? Does it happen at once? And what we see is a lot of times there's a different aspect system. And this is something that a lot of people suggest may be one of those retentions from West African languages, that maybe we're using a different system of aspect than other English speakers because we're following, some retentions from our ancestral languages. So
yeah, because I read that I guess as a group, Black people tend to see time as circular, and our speech reflects that, and that whites might have a tendency to see things linear, whereas we see things as occurring circular, and they just see it as just a straight line in terms of I don't know if that's true for every individual, but I guess as a group, that might be true for many of us. So,
yeah.
I don't know what explains it when we say like if somebody says, when did you get that flower pot? Oh, I've been done had that. And that's like being extremely emphatic that I've had that for a while and you should have known that. Now, I don't know if that's a tense. Is that a tense? I've been done had that, or is that just colorful? When is it something that you can prove in terms of history, and when is it just something that's done for fun?
A lot of times what you do is just try replacing it with other words to see if the sentence sounds good, because you can do the same test with someone who speaks mainstream or general English, like, is this a good sentence or not? And you can ask Black English speakers, does this sound okay? And kind of test, like, is this something that works or not? So what was I thinking with Ben? Let's see.
Like, I've been done had that.
Yeah, like, someone might think, okay, maybe they mean I have, like, I have finished versus I've been finished. And there is a difference, because I have finished just simply means that have, which is present perfect, is, before now I completed something. It doesn't mean when, but just before this present second, I finished this. So I have finished my homework. But if my mom comes home and says, did you finish your homework? And I say, I've been finished it. No, I mean, like, I didn't do it right before you came in the door. Yeah, so that's the difference. Yeah, so have is just before the present. It could have been 2 seconds ago. It's just before the present. Been is what we call remote past, or what we call stressed been is remote past, meaning a long time ago I did. And again, just like with uninflected B, these meanings cannot be conveyed in mainstream English without adding a bunch of words. I finished a long time ago, Mom, or I've been finished. Okay, well, thank you for doing your homework and not making me come home and make sure you're doing what you're supposed to. Yeah, so did you finish your chores? I've been finished them. I've been done my homework. I didn't procrastinate.
That is so colorful and so fun. I'm curious about your trip to Bahia to study the Yoruba language. And I'm wondering, why are they learning the Yoruba language again or bringing it back in Brazil?
Yeah, so just to give a little background, for my dissertation research, I looked at the redevelopment of the Yoruba language in Salvador, Bahia, Brazil, which is the northeastern part. And, a lot of people are kind of shocked by that. Like, well, what? Yoruba, like the language that you hear of in Benin or Togo or Nigeria. And what a lot of people don't know is that at first the Brazilian slave trade was concentrated in like what we call the Congo-Angola region. And then around the time that the slave trade was outlawed, the number of slaves coming from what we call Baida Benin, which is that area like Togo, Benin, Nigeria, the importation of Africans from those countries really increased towards the end of the slave trade. Actually,
20 years after here.
Yeah, so there was basically smuggling. Cuba, same story. There was smuggling for a long time after the slave trade had been outlawed. So, basically in the last waves of Africans, and only just a couple of decades before the end of slavery, there were native Yoruba speakers arriving to Brazil. So as a result of that, you have, cultural practices and religious practices that are very, still retained, still preserved from the Baida Benin. And like, for example, the Candomblé religion, what we call the Nagoketu sect, which is the branch of the religion that, worships the ancestors that are, Yoruba. Okay. So, and even for people who don't practice the Yoruba religion, there's just, when in Brazil, when a Black person thinks of their African ancestry, probably the most salient or accessible idea of Africanity would be Yoruba, because that was the latest arrival of slaves. And I've even heard scholars say that, to us in the U.S., we access Ghana as, like, for example, kente cloth or things like that, different practices, or like Ashanti cultural practices are what African Americans access when we think of African. But in Brazil, Yoruba is predominant. So anyway, so with that, with people practicing Yoruba religion more so than other types of Candomblé, and with people thinking of Yoruba as their ancestral origins, you have a lot of people who are, thinking that to understand more about their history, they have to learn more about Yoruba. And so you have these people enrolling in classes. And so much so that, you have smaller cultural centers that establish classes for Yoruba learning, but you even have federal universities throughout the country that have established centers for learning Yoruba. And even more interesting, they've created exchange programs with, Nigerian universities to bring teachers over to teach the language. So
that is amazing. So is this just a cultural experiment also? I mean, are there certain goals that they're trying to, for example, like with Native Americans, they're trying to, the kids are, they're feeling kind of, they're not grounded. They suffered a couple of generations where the parents had, as children, were separated from their culture, and the kids are just, young Native Americans just are lost. A lot of them, not all of them, of course. So that relearning the language is, I guess, allowing them to get back to their roots and to find their place in the world. Is that what they're doing in Brazil with Yoruba?
I think there's a number of things happening. So again, for the people who are religious practitioners, the songs and the incantations and different rites of their religion are in a variety of Yoruba. And by variety, I mean, it's changed some since the arrival of the people who spoke the language. So it doesn't look like the Yoruba you might hear spoken in again, Nigeria or something today. But basically, they use a variety of Yoruba in their religious practice. And so they're hoping that they can, by learning the language better, that they can be better religious practitioners. Or since they see the Orisha as their ancestors, they're hoping to, communicate better with their ancestors. But for some people,
really interesting.
Yeah, wow. I mean, for some people, it's just a matter of, knowing more about your heritage or yourself through your language, or what you see as your ancestral language. So, there's a number of different things, that drive people to want to study it.
Do you think that should happen here in certain communities?
The relearning of ancestral languages?
Sure, why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be empowering. But I don't know. What do you think? I guess African Americans would identify as that language to relearn.
I guess the problem with us here in the States, though, I guess most of us probably don't know exactly where we came from. So adopting a Nigerian, what's that word you used? The word you used?
The Baida Benin.
Baida Benin, yeah.
Okay.
I guess that would almost be like adopting a foreign culture in a way. We're so far removed, and we're really not sure where we came from. Many of us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it still would be cool. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's just, I mean, just as a cultural exercise.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I mean, we probably have roots in various regions of the continent, you know, whether it's, you know, more Central Africa or more Western. But who knows? I think our roots are so spread out that if you pick one, you probably couldn't be too far off. But
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard when we're talking about the idea of a heritage language or an ancestral language, when we're talking about the fact that people want to sometimes relearn their heritage language, I've heard some linguists treat cases of Blacks wanting to learn Swahili or Yoruba, you know, the same way you would someone whose parents immigrated from Spain, didn't teach them the language, and so they just go back. But, you know, even if you don't have ancestry in that specific country where the language is spoken, you know, we can still see it, you know, as a heritage language because it is of cultural importance. The person perceives it as relevant to their, you know, identity. So whether or not it actually was the language of their ancestors. So,
Awesome.
but
You know, I cannot believe that a half hour is almost up already.
I know,
But
I saw that.
So do you have, I mean, I don't know if now that you have your PhD, if you're trying to keep us enlightened in your research, or if you're going to have like a website with little tidbits on African linguistics or what? Because I'd like to ask you back and talk some more about this.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Because I think, yeah, there was a few topics that we didn't even touch on.
I know half hour goes so fast.
I know it does. I'm surprised. So, yeah. But, yeah, I mean, I'm always.
Do you have like a website or Facebook page where you talk about language?
Not really on my Facebook page. I think I more, you know, look at the news that's going on, current issues and things like that. But I mean, I would be more than happy to come back and, you know, talk to you more about, you know, language use in our community, whether it's, you know, North American or just in the Americas in general.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Caribbean Black English is so interesting as well.
Yeah.
So I'm going to invite you back because I think we just touched the surface.
Yeah, I was like expecting you to go deeper, but I understand time flies.
Yeah. So thank you again. I was just talking with Dr. Adrienne Washington, the first Black person to earn a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pittsburgh, graduate also of Hampton University. And I will definitely invite you back. If you want to have some, I'm assuming shout out is a typically Black phrase. So if you want to throw some shout outs, do so. You can do so now before we say goodbye.
I'll say hi to my mom and my dad in Hampton Roads, Virginia, my sister who's also there, and also my sister in Pennsylvania, and my brother in Florida. So we're all over the East Coast. But hey, everyone.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.